A baby walked up to a burning tree, and there, trapped and in pain, was a German shepherd. What happened next brought tears even to the strongest. If stories like this move you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to catch the next video. The sky that afternoon was painted with a dense grey when the sound of sirens began to cut through the habitual silence of the small rural township of Pine Hollow, Montana. Wildfires weren't uncommon in that region, but never this close to homes. The restless wind carried the acrid smell of burning wood and dead leaves, and amid the rushing and improvised buckets, no one immediately noticed what was tied to the trunk of one of the oldest trees in the main square. A robust German shepherd, with wide eyes and body immobilized by a chain too short to allow escape. While everyone worried about protecting their own yards from the spreading fire, it was a toddler, little Ethan Matthews, just over 2 years old, who first pointed toward the tree, insisting with still incomplete words and agitated gestures. His grandmother Martha, who carried him in her arms, followed his gaze and stopped, petrified. There was the animal, panting, with part of its fur already singed, still fighting against the instinct to give up. The first turning point came with the elderly woman's reaction. Without thinking twice, she handed the boy to a neighbor's arms and ran toward the tree, only to be stopped meters away by the growing flames. But the baby wriggled free, crawled to the garden hose that still spurted weak water, and pointed, as if understanding something the adults couldn't see. It was this gesture that awakened the crowd like a silent alarm. In seconds, residents united. One of them, Jack Wilson, a retired firefighter, took the front line. They used wet blankets, improvised extinguishers, and a collective courage that hadn't been seen in a long time. The dog was freed. With light burns on its paws and ribs, it was welcomed by trembling but gentle arms. And little Ethan, he was lying on the grassy ground, with his tiny hands dirty with soil and the expression of someone who had just done what needed to be done. What no one knew yet was why the animal was tied up. The second major turn came at the rural veterinary hospital, where they discovered the dog's chip. It belonged to a family from the neighboring town, but had been reported missing for months. When they made contact, the story took on even more dramatic contours. The animal had been stolen during a home renovation and never seen again. Sarah Miller, the young veterinarian on duty that day, had seen many cases of abandoned pets in her 3 years of practice in Pine Hollow. But something about this situation struck her differently. Perhaps it was the way the little boy Ethan refused to leave the examination room, or how the German shepherd's eyes followed the toddler's every move, despite being in obvious pain. He's severely dehydrated, and those burns will need daily treatment, Sarah explained to Martha, who stood anxiously by the door, still covered in soot from the rescue. But he's strong. He'll recover. Thank heavens, Martha whispered, watching as her grandson placed his small hand gently on the dog's unburned flank. Ethan hasn't connected with anyone or anything like this since. She trailed off, but Sarah understood. Everyone in town knew about the Matthews family tragedy 8 months ago, how Ethan's parents had been caught in a horrible accident while driving back from Billings, leaving Martha as the boy's sole guardian. The toddler hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since. "Doggy, stay," Ethan suddenly said, his voice clear and determined despite his limited vocabulary. Sarah and Martha exchanged startled glances. 2 words, more than he'd spoken at once in months. "We'll have to find his owners," Sarah said gently, though she already felt a knot forming in her stomach at the thought of separating the child from the animal that had somehow awakened something in him. As the evening deepened into night, word spread through Pine Hollow. Frank Thomas, the town's sheriff, made his way to the clinic, notebook in hand. His weathered face, permanently etched with the lines of 40 years of service to the community, softened when he saw the boy curled up asleep beside the bandaged dog. Got some information, he told Sarah in a low voice. The dog's registered to a family named Reynolds over in Clearwater, been missing since January. He hesitated, then added, "There's something else." Brett Johnson came forward saying he's the one who tied the dog to that oak tree. Martha, who had been listening from the doorway, tensed. Brett Johnson, the man who lives in that rundown place by Miller's Creek. Why would he do such a thing? Frank sighed heavily. Claims he found the animal wandering on Route 12 and couldn't keep him at his place. Says he was going to report it, but forgot. Forgot. Sarah's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and glanced at the sleeping boy. That dog would have perished if not for Ethan. Frank nodded grimly. That's not all. Once folks started talking, I've had 3. Other reports come in about animals found in poor condition around Johnson's property over the past 2 years. Nothing we could ever prove, but a soft whimper from the examination table drew their attention. The German Shepherd had awakened and was trying to shift closer to Ethan despite its injuries. The boy, still asleep, instinctively placed his arm across the dog's neck in a protective gesture. I've never seen anything like it, Sarah murmured. It's as if they know each other somehow. Well, Frank said, scratching his head, I've got to contact the Reynolds family first thing tomorrow. They've been searching for this dog. Apparently he's some kind of service animal. Highly trained. Martha's eyes widened. Service animal? For what purpose? Frank consulted his notes. Some kind of therapy dog, trained to work with. He paused, his eyes drifting to the sleeping child. Children with trauma. The 3 adults stood in silence, watching as the rescued dog gently nuzzled closer to the boy who had saved him. Outside, the wind had shifted, pushing the wildfire away from Pine Hollow, but inside the clinic, something had just begun to burn even more intensely, a spark of hope, of connection, of possibility. What none of them could possibly know was how this chance encounter would not only change little Ethan's life, but would set in motion a chain of events that would transform their entire community, revealing secrets long buried and healing wounds thought beyond repair. As the first drops of rain began to tap against the clinic windows, nature's mercy finally arriving to battle the flames outside, Martha whispered a silent prayer of thanks. For the first time since she'd lost her daughter and son-in-law, she felt something other than grief stirring in her heart, something that felt dangerously like hope. The third turning point came from where it was least expected. The next morning, as Sarah was changing the German Shepherd's bandages, the clinic door swung open. A man with disheveled hair and wrinkled clothes stood there, his hands nervously fidgeting with his cap. I heard about the dog, Brett Johnson said, his voice barely above a whisper. I came to explain myself. Frank, who had arrived earlier to coordinate the call to the Reynolds family, stepped forward with narrowed eyes. You've got a lot to answer for, Brett. The man's shoulders hunched further. I know, but it ain't what everyone's saying. He looked around nervously, taking in Martha sitting in the corner with Ethan on her lap, the boy's eyes fixed on the dog. I didn't steal that animal. Found him wandering near the creek, collar all torn up. He was scared, snapping at anyone who came close. That doesn't explain why you chained him to a tree and left him to die in a fire, Sarah said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Brett's face reddened. I didn't know there'd be a fire, and I wasn't gonna leave him forever, just till I figured out what to do. My landlord, he don't allow pets, and that animal was too big to hide. As the adults argued, Ethan slipped from his grandmother's lap and toddled over to the examination table. The German Shepherd's tail began to thump weakly against the metal surface. Friend, Ethan said clearly, placing his hand on the dog's head. The room fell silent. Martha pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Does he not talk much? Brett asked, confusion evident on his face. Not since the accident, Martha replied softly. Not until yesterday. A knock at the door interrupted the tense scene. A tall, well-dressed woman entered, followed by a teenage girl whose face was streaked with tears. The woman's eyes immediately landed on the German Shepherd. "Max!" the teenager cried out, rushing forward. The dog's ears perked up, but surprisingly, he remained close to Ethan rather than jumping to greet his apparent owner. "I'm Rebecca Reynolds," the woman introduced herself. "This is my daughter, Ashley. We got the call about Max this morning. We've been searching for him for months." Ashley approached the table cautiously, her hands trembling. "What happened to him?" "His fur. He was tied to a tree during yesterday's wildfire," Sarah explained gently. "This little boy noticed him and helped save his life." Ashley's eyes, filled with gratitude, turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she whispered. But Ethan had backed away, pressing himself against Martha's legs, his face crumpled in distress as he watched Ashley stroke Max's head. "Doggy, stay!" he insisted, his voice rising in panic. "Ethan, doggy!" Martha knelt beside him. "Honey, Max belongs to this family. They've been missing him." Ashley looked between the distressed toddler and her dog, conflict playing across her face. She turned to her mother. "Mum, what's going on? Why isn't Max more excited to see me?" Rebecca approached slowly, studying the situation with careful eyes. Frank mentioned on the phone that Max was working as a therapy dog before he disappeared. "Is that right?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "He was specially trained to work with traumatized children. We had just completed his certification when he was stolen from our backyard." She watched the interaction between Ethan and Max thoughtfully. "It's what he was trained to do, bond with children who need emotional support." Martha looked up sharply. "You said he was stolen, not lost." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Our security camera caught someone taking him. The police in Clearwater investigated, but the footage was too grainy to identify the thief." Her gaze drifted to Brett, who shifted uncomfortably. "I swear I just found him by the creek," Brett insisted. "Maybe he got away from whoever took him." Frank's radio crackled to life and he stepped outside to answer it. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Just got word from Deputy Lewis," he announced. He went out to Brett's place with a warrant based on the other reports. Found 3 collars buried in the backyard. One matches the description of Max's original collar. The room erupted in accusations and denials. Brett's face went pale, then red with anger. "You can't pin this on me. I'm being set up," he shouted, backing toward the door. Throughout the commotion, no one noticed as Ashley knelt beside Ethan. She watched as the little boy pressed his face into Max's fur, whispering words only the dog could hear. The 4th turning point happened when the veterinarian, observing the way the German Shepherd looked at the toddler, suggested they try an approach test. The scene that unfolded touched even the most skeptical. The dog, though injured, lay at the boy's feet and rested his muzzle on his legs as if he had found a lost home. Max was trained to respond to emotional trauma, Ashley said softly, addressing Martha rather than the arguing adults. "He can sense when someone's hurting inside. That's what he's doing with Ethan, isn't it?" Martha nodded wordlessly, tears streaming down her face. "How long has your grandson been like this?" Rebecca asked, stepping away from the heated argument to join her daughter. 8 months, Martha whispered. "His parents, my daughter and son-in-law, there was an accident on Highway 15. Ethan was with a sitter. He hasn't been the same since." Ashley's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Mom," she said urgently, "remember what Dr. Linden said about Max, about his special ability?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "He said Max was 1 in 1,000, that he could form deep emotional connections with people suffering from traumatic grief." She looked at the little boy with new understanding, that he could sometimes help where humans couldn't reach. The argument across the room had escalated. Brett was now being restrained by Frank, his protests growing more desperate. "You don't understand. I needed the money. The collector promised good homes for all of them." "Collector?" Frank's grip tightened. "What collector?" Before Brett could answer, Ashley made a decision that would become the fifth turning point in this unfolding drama. She approached Ethan and knelt to eye level. "Ethan," she said gently, "do you love Max very much?" The toddler nodded solemnly, his small hand still buried in the dog's fur. "He loves you too," Ashley continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I can tell, and Max is very special. He knows when people need him." She took a deep breath. "Would you like Max to stay with you for a while, to be your friend?" Martha gasped. "Ashley, we couldn't possibly—" "It's not permanent," Rebecca interjected, placing a hand on Martha's arm. "But Max was trained for this exact purpose, to help children heal from trauma. Maybe this is where he needs to be right now." As the adults began to discuss this unexpected proposal, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Max, despite his injuries, had positioned himself protectively beside Ethan, his body creating a barrier between the boy and the ongoing confrontation. And Ethan, who had barely communicated in months, was now patting the dog's head and whispering in his ear. "Friend," he said again, this time with a small but unmistakable smile. Outside the clinic windows, the residents of Pine Hollow were gathering. Word had spread about the rescued dog, the heroic toddler, and now the revelation of Brett Johnson's involvement in what appeared to be a pet theft operation. But something else was brewing in the small town. A sense of purpose, of community responsibility that had been dormant for too long. Eleanor Jenkins, the town's most senior resident at 92 years old, tapped her cane against the clinic door before entering. Her arrival silenced even Brett's protests. "I've lived in Pine Hollow all my life," she announced, her voice surprisingly strong for her years. "And I've seen how we've let things slide, animals disappearing, people looking the other way. Well, no more." She fixed Brett with a steely gaze before turning to Martha and Ethan. "That boy did what grown folks should have done long ago. He saw suffering, and he acted." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a revelation, and as if in response, Ethan looked up from Max and said, clear as day, "Help doggy, all doggies." No one in that room could possibly know how prophetic those simple words would prove to be, or how they would catalyze changes that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of their small Montana town. But as the morning light strengthened, casting long golden rays through the clinic windows, something fundamental had shifted in Pine Hollow. A breach had been healed, a connection forged, and a journey begun. And it had all started with a fire, a dog, and a little boy who refused to look away. In the days that followed, Pine Hollow transformed the incident into a mobilization. The sixth turning point came when a group of elderly women, led by Eleanor Jenkins, initiated a campaign for a new animal protection policy. A small emergency shelter was created, and little Ethan became the symbol of purity that transforms. Posters with his image holding Max's leash, now treated and with a new name, Hero, spread throughout the streets. "I still can't believe the change in him," Martha confided to Sarah 3 weeks after the fire as they watched Ethan and Max playing in the newly established Paws Park behind the town hall. The same space that had once been a neglected lot was now a fenced area where residents could bring their pets. "It's like he's a different child," Sarah agreed, noting how Ethan was now stringing together simple sentences, his vocabulary expanding, daily in his eagerness to communicate with Max and about Max. "Hero, good boy," Ethan called out, throwing a soft ball that the German Shepherd eagerly retrieved despite the still healing patch on his flank. Martha dabbed at her eyes. "His therapist in Billings says she's never seen such rapid progress in a trauma case. She wants to study the bond between them." "What about the Reynolds family?" Sarah asked, watching as Ashley, who had stayed in Pine Hollow to help with Max's recovery, approached Ethan with gentle high fives. That's another miracle, Martha said. Rebecca has been incredible. They visit twice a week, and she's helping us train Max properly. She says seeing how her daughter has connected with Ethan and our community is healing something in their family too. The investigation into Brett Johnson's activities had revealed a disturbing pattern. He had been stealing pets from surrounding communities and selling them to a collector who resold them in cities hundreds of miles away. The revelation had shocked Pine Hollow, but it had also galvanized them into action. The town meeting tonight should be interesting, Sarah remarked. I heard Mayor Thompson is proposing a new ordinance. About time, Martha nodded firmly. Eleanor says she won't rest until Pine Hollow becomes a model for rural animal protection. As twilight approached, the community center filled beyond capacity. Mayor Thompson, a tall, distinguished man with a silver mustache and reputation for cautious governance, looked uncharacteristically animated as he called the meeting to order. Folks, we've had a wake-up call, he began, gesturing to where Martha sat with Ethan on her lap, Max dutifully at their feet. What happened 3 weeks ago showed us two things: that we've been turning a blind eye to animal mistreatment in our community, and that sometimes it takes the innocence of a child to remind us of our responsibilities. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I'm proposing the Ethan's Law, a comprehensive animal protection ordinance that will establish a volunteer-run animal welfare committee, mandatory reporting of suspected animal abuse, and a small tax increase to fund our new emergency shelter. The debate that followed was passionate but surprisingly unified. Even those initially concerned about the tax increase were swayed by the testimony of Rebecca Reynolds, who had driven from Clearwater for the meeting. My family lost Max for nearly 4 months, she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. During that time, he suffered neglect and mistreatment that could have been prevented if someone had reported his situation. But something beautiful has also come from this tragedy. She smiled at Ethan, who was now drowsily leaning against his grandmother. Max was trained to help children heal from trauma, and now he's exactly where he needs to be. My daughter Ashley and I have decided to formally place Max with Ethan as a therapy dog, while maintaining our connection with both of them. The announcement brought tears to many eyes, including Martha's, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Furthermore, my husband and I have decided to donate resources to your new shelter as a form of gratitude. We run a small foundation dedicated to training therapy animals, and we'd like to partner with Pine Hollow to expand this work. The 7th turning point was emotional. An elderly woman from the village who had isolated herself for years due to past traumas involving loss of animals approached the group to help. The story of Max and Ethan had reopened a hope in her that she believed forgotten. Margaret Wheeler had been a recluse for so long that many newer residents didn't even know she existed. Her appearance at the meeting, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick, caused a stir of whispers. I haven't spoken publicly in 15 years, she began, her voice rusty with disuse. Not since I lost my therapy practice and my beloved animals in the fire of '09. She paused, gathering strength. I was once a certified animal-assisted therapist working with trauma victims. After I lost everything, I couldn't bear to start again. She turned her gaze to Ethan, who had awakened and was watching her curiously. But this child and this dog have reminded me of something important, that healing is possible, even when it seems impossible. Her voice grew stronger. I'd like to offer my expertise to your new committee. Perhaps it's time for me to come out of the shadows. The meeting erupted in applause. Eleanor Jenkins hobbled over to embrace her old friend, a reunion decades in the making. As summer bloomed in Pine Hollow, changes became visible everywhere. The emergency shelter, initially a temporary solution, evolved into the Pine Hollow Animal Sanctuary and Therapy Center. with Margaret Wheeler overseeing a program that paired rescued animals with people in need of emotional support. Ethan, now approaching his 3rd birthday, had become the unofficial mascot of the center. His vocabulary continued to expand, and while he still carried the trauma of his loss, his interaction with Max had opened pathways to healing that once seemed impossible. "See the puppies," he insisted one bright July morning, tugging Martha toward the sanctuary where 3 rescue puppies had recently arrived. Martha laughed, a sound that had once been rare but was becoming wonderfully common. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll see the puppies. But remember, they're still learning to be gentle, just like you were with Max." "I be careful," Ethan promised solemnly, with Max walking sedately beside him. The sanctuary had become a hub of activity. Ashley Reynolds, who had decided to spend her summer in Pine Hollow before starting veterinary college in the fall, was teaching a group of children how to safely approach and care for animals. Rebecca visited weekly, bringing expertise and resources from their foundation. Even Frank the sheriff had become a regular volunteer, finding unexpected peace in the presence of the animals he now helped protect. The 8th development brought even more emotion. The video of the rescue, captured by a teenager, went viral. The national media became interested. Reports showed how a 2-year-old child had initiated, with a gesture, a movement of collective compassion. In an interview, the grandmother simply said, "He still doesn't speak properly, but his heart speaks loudly." Jason Tucker, a 17-year-old with dreams of becoming a filmmaker, had been testing his new phone camera when the fire broke out. His shaky footage of Ethan pointing toward the tree, of Martha's desperate attempt to reach Max, and of the community coming together to save the dog, had initially been shared just among friends. But somehow, it had found its way to a popular social media account dedicated to animal rescues. Within days, Pine Hollow was inundated with media requests. A crew from a national morning show set up in the town square, interviewing Martha with Ethan shy but present beside her, Max never leaving his side. "How does it feel to know your grandson's actions have inspired people across the country?" the interviewer asked. Martha, unprepared for the spotlight but resolutely honest, replied, "Ethan didn't do anything extraordinary in his mind. He just saw suffering and responded with the pureness of heart that children have before the world. Teaches them to look away." She stroked Ethan's hair. "He still doesn't speak properly, but his heart speaks loudly. I think that's why people are responding. They recognize that kind of uncalculated compassion is what we all need more of." The segment aired the following week and triggered an avalanche of responses. Donations poured in for the sanctuary. Letters arrived for Ethan from across the country. A children's book author reached out about creating a story based on Ethan and Max. And perhaps most significantly, other communities began reaching out to learn how they could replicate Pine Hollow's rapid transformation into a haven for animal welfare. As summer stretched into early autumn, the physical changes in Pine Hollow became more permanent. The main square, where Max had been tied to the old oak tree, underwent a renovation. The tree, damaged but surviving, was now the centerpiece of a memorial garden, with a simple bronze plaque telling the story of the fire and the rescue. But the most profound changes were less visible. Relationships had healed. Margaret Wheeler had rejoined the community she'd avoided for 15 years. Eleanor Jenkins had found renewed purpose in her final years. And Martha had watched as her grandson, whose world had seemed to end with his parents' accident, slowly but unmistakably found his way back to joy. What none of them could have predicted was that their story was about to take yet another unexpected turn, one that would test their newfound unity and bring a final, surprising resolution to the chain of events set in motion by a fire, a dog, and a child's compassion. The ninth point of change was practical. The man who had tied up the dog was fined and judicially prohibited from having animals. This wasn't done out of vengeance, but as a gesture of responsibility. The village now had a voice and took care of its own. Brett Johnson's sentencing had been a somber affair. Unlike the community's expectations, he hadn't been sent to jail. Instead, he received 2 years of probation, a substantial fine to be paid to the animal sanctuary, mandatory community service, and a lifetime ban on animal ownership. "It doesn't seem enough," Sarah confided to Frank as they left the courthouse in Billings. "After all he did, not just to Max, but to all those other animals." Frank's weathered face showed his own conflicted feelings. "Sometimes justice looks different than we expect." Brett's agreed to testify against the larger trafficking ring that might shut down operations across 3 states. What neither of them could have anticipated was Brett's reaction to his sentence. Instead of resentment, something in him seemed to crack open during the proceedings. Perhaps it was Ethan's presence in the courtroom, the toddler watching solemnly from Martha's lap, or perhaps it was the testimony of Margaret Wheeler, who spoke not of punishment, but of rehabilitation. "In my 40 years of practice before my retirement," she had told the judge, "I learned that people who harm animals are often carrying wounds of their own. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps us understand how to prevent them from happening again." 2 weeks after the sentencing, Brett appeared at the sanctuary's gate, hat in hand, shoulders hunched against the weight of public shame. "I've come to start my community service," he told Margaret, who had been appointed his supervisor. "I know most folks won't want me around, but the judge said—" "I requested you specifically," Margaret interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Come with me." She led him not to the kennels or the cleaning supplies as he'd expected, but to a small office where Martha sat with Ethan. Max, never far from the boy, raised his head and gave a low growl at Brett's scent. Brett froze in the doorway. "I shouldn't be here. The boy needs to see that people can change," Martha finished for him. "That's what we're teaching him." Over the following months, Brett's transformation became another chapter in Pine Hollow's evolution. Under Margaret's guidance, he worked tirelessly at the sanctuary, his natural affinity for construction and repair making him invaluable to their expanding facilities. He spoke little, but his actions, the gentleness he developed with the animals, the extra hours he put in without being asked, spoke volumes. The community's reaction was mixed. Some, like Eleanor, maintained a frosty distance. Others, seeing his genuine efforts, cautiously accepted his presence as part of their collective healing. As the 1-year anniversary of the fire approached, Pine Hollow prepared for a ceremony to mark both remembrance and renewal. The Hope Garden, as they now called the renovated square, would be officially dedicated, and the sanctuary would hold an open house to showcase its work. It was during the preparations that an unexpected letter arrived at Martha's door. "It's from a law firm in New York," she told Sarah, puzzled, as she opened the envelope in the sanctuary's kitchen. Sarah watched as Martha's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What is it?" "It's about Ethan's parents, my daughter Jennifer and her husband Mike," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was an insurance policy we didn't know about, a substantial one." She looked up, tears brimming. "It says Ethan is the beneficiary of a trust that's now worth over $2 million. The news sent ripples through their close circle. $2 million was a life-changing sum in a town like Pine Hollow, where the median household income barely reached $40,000 a year. "What will you do?" Rebecca asked during her next visit, watching as Ethan and Max played with the sanctuary's newest resident, a 3-legged collie mix named Lucky. Martha shook her head, still processing. "The money is in trust for Ethan's education and future, but there's a provision allowing for his health and well-being expenditures." She hesitated. "I've been thinking." About expanding the sanctuary, Rebecca finished, smiling knowingly. Martha nodded. It feels right, like something Jennifer and Mike would approve of. Using part of Ethan's inheritance to build something that helps him and others heal. The plans came together quickly. An architectural firm from Billings donated services to design an expanded Pine Hollow Animal Therapy and Education Center. The existing sanctuary would grow to include indoor training facilities, a small veterinary clinic where Sarah could offer discounted services, and educational spaces for community workshops. As word spread, an unexpected conflict emerged. A developer from Billings, Carter Williams, had been eyeing the adjacent property for vacation cabins. Now, with rumors of a well-funded expansion, he accelerated his plans, submitting permits and making a public case for the economic benefits his project would bring to Pine Hollow. Jobs versus animals, Mayor Thompson summarized grimly at an emergency town council meeting. That's how he's framing it, and it's gaining traction with some folks. The sanctuary's supporters were caught off guard. They had assumed their project would be universally welcomed, but economic anxieties ran deep in the rural community. We need to remind people that this isn't just about animals, Margaret urged. It's about healing, community, the future of Pine Hollow, as a place that stands for something better than quick profit. The debate divided the town in a way the original Animal Protection Ordinance hadn't. Carter Williams was charismatic and persuasive, hosting dinners at the local diner where he painted a picture of Pine Hollow transformed into a tourist destination, with the sanctuary relegated to a charming but minor attraction. It comes down to priorities, he told a gathering of business owners. Do we want to be known as the town that rescues strays or the town that rescued its own economy? Sarah, attending the dinner to understand the opposition, felt her heart sink at the nods of agreement. She texted Martha, "We're losing ground. Williams is good at what he does." The most unexpected intervention came from Brett Johnson. At a particularly heated town hall meeting, where supporters of both projects were growing increasingly antagonistic, he stood up and asked for the microphone. A hush fell over the room. Brett, still viewed with suspicion by many, rarely spoke in public. "I know most of you don't think much of me," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "and you've got reason. But I've learned something this past year watching what's happened at the sanctuary." He paused, gathering courage. "I've seen kids like Ethan heal. I've seen Margaret Wheeler get her life back. I've seen animals nobody wanted become somebody's reason to get up in the morning." He looked directly at Carter Williams. "Your project talks about bringing money to Pine Hollow, but what the sanctuary brings is meaning. You can't put a dollar value on that." His simple testimony shifted the atmosphere in the room. One by one, others stood to share stories of how the sanctuary had affected them. A veteran with PTSD who volunteered with the horses, a teenager who'd found purpose working with rescued birds, an elderly man whose only companionship was a cat. From the sanctuary's adoption program, Carter Williams, sensing the changing tide, adjusted tactics. After the meeting, he approached Martha with a compromise, a joint development that would include both his cabins and an expanded sanctuary, with shared green spaces and programs that would allow his future guests to interact with the therapy animals. "It could be a win-win," he suggested. "Your programs get funding and visibility. My project gets heart and purpose." Martha listened carefully, her innate caution warring with practical considerations. "I'd need to discuss this with our board, and with Ethan, in my own way. Nothing happens without his trust being protected." Carter nodded, his businessman's confidence tempered with new respect. "Of course, I understand that's non-negotiable." As the meeting dispersed, Martha found herself standing beside Brett, who looked as surprised by his own speech as everyone else had been. "Thank you," she said simply. He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Just spoke the truth." The next day, Martha gathered their inner circle at the sanctuary. Sarah, Margaret, Rebecca, who had driven in from Clearwater, Mayor Thompson and Frank. Ethan played nearby with Max, blissfully unaware of the adult concerns swirling around him. "What do we think?" Martha asked after explaining Carter's proposal. "Can we trust this partnership?" Sarah was skeptical. His primary interest is still profit. What happens if the sanctuary's side becomes less profitable than he hopes? "I had my deputy run a background check," Frank offered. "Williams's developments in other towns have been successful, but there have been complaints about him cutting corners environmentally." Rebecca, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "What if we flipped the dynamics? Instead of being his charitable sideline, what if the sanctuary owned the land and leased space to his cabins?" Martha's eyes widened. "With Ethan's trust, we could potentially buy the entire property outright. E.g., and set conditions," Margaret added, warming to the idea. "The cabins would have to meet our environmental standards, and a percentage of their profits would support the sanctuary programs." The idea gained momentum as they discussed it. By controlling the land, they could ensure the sanctuary's mission remained primary, while still allowing for the economic benefits Williams' project promised. When they approached Carter with their counter-proposal, his initial reaction was predictable resistance. But as Martha outlined how his development would be positioned as part of a larger healing destination, attracting visitors specifically interested in animal therapy and eco-friendly retreats, his business instincts recognized the unique marketing angle. "It would be the first of its kind," he acknowledged grudgingly, "a true partnership between commerce and cause." As autumn deepened toward winter, the negotiations continued. Plans were drawn, redrawn, and finalized. What emerged was a vision neither side had initially imagined: the Pine Hollow Healing Retreat, where the sanctuary formed the heart of a thoughtfully designed community that included guest cabins, educational facilities, and spaces for both human and animal rehabilitation. The anniversary of the fire approached, and with it, the planned dedication ceremony for the Hope Garden. Now, it would also serve as the unveiling of their ambitious new vision for Pine Hollow's future. The 10th turning point, the most powerful one, was the reunion of Max with fire. 1 year later, the village organized a spring festival, and the tree where he had almost perished was replanted. The dog, now strong and playful, participated in the ceremony alongside the boy, who walked with firmer steps and even brighter eyes. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Montana spring morning. Pine Hollow had been transformed in the months leading up to it, not just by the construction that had begun on the expanded sanctuary and retreat center, but by a renewed sense of purpose that infused the town. "I can hardly believe it's been a year," Martha told Sarah as they helped Ethan into his special outfit for the day, a small blue blazer over jeans, his fancy clothes as he called them. Max, freshly groomed and wearing a new blue collar that matched Ethan's jacket, sat patiently by the door as if understanding the importance of the occasion. "A year that changed everything," Sarah agreed, fastening Ethan's tiny tie. She had her own cause for celebration. Her veterinary practice had tripled in size with the sanctuary's expansion, allowing her to hire 2 assistants and finally pay off her student loans. The Hope Garden was unrecognizable from the fire-scorched square of a year ago. The damaged oak had been carefully nursed back to health by the town's most devoted gardeners. Around it, a circular plaza of natural stone had been laid, with benches and native plantings creating a space for reflection. At its center, a simple bronze statue depicted a kneeling child with an outstretched hand, a German shepherd seated before him. By 10 o'clock, it seemed the entire population of Pine Hollow had gathered, along with visitors from Clearwater, Billings, and beyond. The Reynolds family stood near the front, Ashley home from her first year of veterinary school for the occasion. Carter Williams and his development team stood respectfully to one side, their initial competitive stance long replaced by genuine investment in the town's unique vision. Mayor Thompson stepped forward to begin the ceremony, but was interrupted by an unexpected sight. Ethan, who had broken away from Martha's hand, was walking purposefully toward the newly planted trees at the garden's edge. Max followed closely, his protective instinct never wavering. The crowd fell silent, watching as the now 3-year-old boy stopped before the youngest sapling, a maple barely taller than himself. He placed his small hand on its trunk, then looked back at the gathering. "New tree," he said clearly, his vocabulary now extensive, though still marked by the direct simplicity of early childhood. "Like new friends, grows big." Martha moved to join him, but Margaret gently held her back. "Let him have this moment," she whispered. Ethan continued, seeming unaware of the profound impact his actions were having on the assembled adults. "Fire bad for tree, bad for Max." He patted the dog's head. "But new tree good, Max good, Ethan good." In his simple words, many found tears springing to their eyes. The child who had barely spoken a year ago was now expressing, with perfect clarity, the journey they had all taken from trauma to healing. Mayor Thompson, recovering his composure, walked over to join Ethan by the sapling. "Young man, I think you've just given the perfect dedication speech." He turned to address the crowd. "1 year ago, a wildfire threatened our town. It could have been a story of loss and destruction. Instead, because of a child's compassion and a community's response, it became a story of rescue, renewal, and responsibility." He gestured to the bronze plaque being unveiled on a natural stone at the garden's entrance. "The Hope Garden," he read aloud, "dedicated to the courage of a child who taught us to see and a community that learned to act. May we always protect those who cannot protect themselves." The applause that followed was punctuated by Max's single enthusiastic bark, bringing laughter to the emotional moment. As the formal ceremony concluded, the celebration spread throughout the town. The sanctuary hosted an open house, showcasing its current programs and unveiling plans for the expanded facilities. Carter Williams, now fully integrated into the project team, led tours explaining how the retreat cabins would complement rather than compete with the sanctuary's mission. Rebecca Reynolds, addressing a group of interested visitors, explained the vision for the therapy programs. "What we're creating here isn't just about animal welfare, as important as that is. It's about recognizing that healing happens in community, across species, across generations, across differences." Martha, standing nearby with Ethan and Max, felt a surge of pride, not just for her grandson, whose resilience continued to amaze her, but for the town that had risen to his challenge. Pine Hollow had transformed from a place marked by passive acceptance to one defined by active compassion. As the afternoon progressed, Martha noticed a familiar figure standing apart from the crowds, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Brett Johnson, his community service hours long completed, had maintained his connection to the sanctuary, becoming one of their most reliable volunteers. Still, he kept a low profile, aware that some in town would never fully trust him again. Surprising. Herself, Martha approached him, Ethan and Max following. "You should join the celebration," she said. "You're part of this too." Brett shook his head. "I'm better in the background. Besides, today is about the good that came from the fire, not the bad that caused it." Ethan, who had been listening with the intense focus characteristic of children, his age, suddenly stepped forward and took Brett's hand. "Mr. Brett helps animals now," he said, with the certainty only a child can muster. "Like Ethan helps." The simple absolution in those words seemed to unlock something in Brett. His shoulders, perpetually hunched with the weight of his past mistakes, straightened slightly. "That's right, buddy. I'm trying." As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the Hope Garden, The formal events gave way to a community dinner on the town square. Tables laden with potluck contributions stretched in long rows, fairy lights strung overhead, creating a magical atmosphere. Eleanor Jenkins, now approaching her 93rd birthday, but still sharp as ever, tapped her glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, her voice carrying surprising strength, "to unexpected beginnings." "To unexpected beginnings," the gathering echoed, glasses raising. Margaret Wheeler, seated beside her old friend, added, "And to second chances." The sentiment rippled through the crowd. To second chances. Martha, watching Ethan happily sharing his dinner with Max, felt a completeness she hadn't experienced since losing her daughter. The pain would never fully disappear, nor should it, but alongside it had grown something new and sustaining. A purpose, a community, a future. As twilight deepened into evening, a local musician began playing soft guitar music. Couples danced on the grass, children chased fireflies, and conversations flowed easily between neighbors and visitors alike. Sarah found Martha sitting on one of the new garden benches, watching it all with a peaceful expression. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said, joining her friend. Martha smiled. "I was just thinking about how life surprises us. A year ago, I was just trying to get through each day, worried I'd never be enough for Ethan after what he'd lost." She looked toward where Ethan was now dozing against Max's side. The dog alert despite the late hour? "I never imagined all this." "None of us did," Sarah agreed, following her gaze. "But maybe that's the point. We never know what ripples our actions will create." As the celebration continued around them, Martha felt a deep sense of rightness settle in her heart. In the very place where suffering had nearly ended in tragedy, now flourished a garden named Hope, where a simple statue showed a child kneeling, extending a hand to a German shepherd. And all who passed by remembered. True courage sometimes comes from the smallest among us. The first morning light was breaking over Pine Hollow when Martha woke to the sound of Ethan's laughter. She found him in the backyard with Max, both gloriously muddy from what appeared to be an early adventure. "Look, Grandma," he called, his vocabulary now expansive, his joy uncontained. "Max and me found a butterfly. It has wings like fire, but it's not scary fire. It's beautiful fire." As she watched him point to the orange monarch resting on a nearby flower, Martha thought of how far they had all come. The fire that had nearly taken Max had instead ignited something else entirely, a spark of healing, of connection, of possibility that had transformed not just a child and a dog, but an entire community. The land where their tragedy had nearly occurred now blossomed a place called Hope, and all who visited were reminded of a simple truth, that sometimes courage comes in the smallest packages and healing begins with a single act of compassion. "Show me your butterfly," Martha said, taking her grandson's hand. And together, with Max faithfully by their side, they stepped forward into the promise of a new day. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan and Max has touched your heart. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexity. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments.